There we go. We're recording. Hello?
Hello.
Hey, Eddie?
How are you, man?
Hey, Eddie Trunk. Nice to see you again. Eddie, let me start off by saying you have no idea. I'm actually, even though I've met you a few times in person, I'm actually like shaking right now because I've always wanted to do this. It's an honor to have.
And I appreciate that. And I'm sorry for all the confusion and craziness trying to get it together. I've just been running around, and I missed the window yesterday. I forgot, and then I called you late, and I got a voicemail, and I was like, man, I finally got to connect with this guy. I don't want him to think the wrong thing. So
No, Eddie, listen, I understand you're busy, and I know I'm a fucking pain in the ass. Believe me.
No, you're not at all, man. Listen, I'm happy. I'm happy to talk to anybody, so I appreciate it.
No, but it's an honor. And for those of you who don't know, this is on the phone with us tonight is Eddie Trunk, the host of the VH1 Classics That Metal Show, which is by far the best show on TV. And it's I'm so glad you've been on for 8 seasons. I hope you go another 8 seasons. I was also actually glad to hear that they gave you 2 extra episodes this season, which was cool.
Yeah, we definitely are going to do a 9th season, which is going to start shooting in the middle of October, and that's going to be 8 episodes as opposed to 10, which we have going right now. It's totally up to the network how many shows we do, how often we work, when we work. If it was up to us, we would be doing the show every day. I mean,
I know.
But everything costs money, and TV costs a lot of money to do it right, and we just, we've been on for a long time, and we're happy to keep doing it, and it's been growing, and more and more people know about it. The show's finally moving up to high def finally next season, so we're making all these little strides, and it's taken a while, but the support of the audience has been amazing, and because of that, we're in the middle of season 8 right now, and we're going to be shooting 9 in a few weeks, so we'll keep chugging along, and I hope for a day someday that they want to do the show at least, one new episode a week. But as I recently said in an interview they did with me in Rolling Stone, I said if it's up to me, it would be 5 nights a week live every night, and I want to become the David Letterman of metal. So
I'm telling you,
really cool.
You know what? It reminds me of, barring the live performances, it reminds me of Don Kirshner's rock concert, which is by far, but your show is much more in depth. And what I like about you, Eddie, is that if you're not like, excuse the expression, you don't kiss the musician's ass. If you like, especially when you're doing the top 5. Like I was watching over the past weekend, and you're fighting over Phil Anselmo. You know what I'm saying? You love Phil Anselmo. You do nothing against Pantera, but you know what I'm saying? And it's like you're not afraid to say something if something is bad or something, which is good. You know what I'm saying? You keep it real, and even though you may catch a lot of heat for it, I respect that about you.
Well, thanks. That's what's always been about for me. I never want to lose sight of what it is to be a fan, and sometimes it's tough because a lot of these guys, having done this between TV and radio now for 30 years,
right.
All these guys have become friends, and I know a lot of them very, very well on the air and off. But I think that it's important that, that you say how you feel, positively, negatively, or somewhere in the middle. Everybody's not always going to love it, and it may tweak some people, but at the end of the day, I've always been a believer that it gets you a hell of a lot more respect from your audience, and at the end of the day, the artist as well, because, the difference is that the artist will know that if you tell them you love a new record or a show, they know that you really mean that because you're willing to say that you don't. And I think that buys you a lot more. I started doing that years ago on radio.
Right.
I grew up listening to Howard Stern as a big fan of Howard Stern's, and I would listen to him, and I would hear him have these actors or whoever on, and or talk about these people and say, oh man, that guy sucks, or I didn't like this, or I thought this show was weak, or whatever. And I said, well, here's a guy that's actually being completely honest on the radio, and then I listen to music radio, and I'm like, how could that person think that every single song they're playing is the greatest song they've ever played? I mean, there must be some songs they're playing that they don't really like, they just have to play. So, I said, why can't, that mentality that Howard's doing of just being, talking like you would talk to your buddy at a bar,
right?
Why can't that come through on the radio? And again, I'm not going to lie, it's tough sometimes, and there are times you sometimes have to kind of take the high road for the better of the show and the guest and not making anybody completely uncomfortable.
Right.
I think that there's a respectful way to tell somebody if you're not feeling something that they once did. And the last thing I'll say on that topic is I think that I give huge credit to the artists and the musicians who get that and respect that.
Right.
Bands that come to mind like Metallica and Def Leppard, they get that. I've never always said great things about them, but they never held it against me. They know I'm a fan. They remember what it is to be a fan. And quite honestly, there's bands I supported for 30 years and still support, but I said, one thing out of 99% positive that I didn't like, and suddenly you're thrown off the boat. I never quite understood that, but that's okay too. I mean, it all works out.
Well, you know what? You're right. You have to be diplomatic to a degree. But you know what? In the end, a fan is somebody that's going to tell you, like you said, whether it's good or bad. And you know what it is I guess when rock musicians aside, I guess they're used to people kissing their ass. But that doesn't help. It gives them a false sense of something. They want to know because music is an art and it's a passion, just like acting or anything else. So I think, like I said, it benefits the fan and it benefits the artist as well. If if you don't like it, so then they know not to duplicate the mistakes or whatever.
The other thing about it, Carlo, is that it's also, and I tell everybody this too, there's a lot of bands that come up to me and ask me for my opinion on their demo or whatever.
Right.
And I tell people the same. Any review, any critique, any A&R stuff, anything like that, at the end of the day, it's one person's opinion.
Right.
And if someone is a professional at it, you look at it as, okay, a professional opinion. But you know what? How many people have given opinions on so many levels that a movie sucked or an album sucked or a band sucked?
Right.
Gone on to have those bands and those songs or movies have had huge, huge, huge success. So you can't live and die by it. It's one person's opinion.
Right.
And some people's opinion maybe carries a little more weight than others in the public eye, but at the end of the day, that's what it always boils down to. And, you have to learn to have a thick skin. I mean, God knows, being in this business as long as I have, I've taken my fair share of shots. I know that there's, listen, most of the people out there, thankfully, like me and support me and like what I do.
Right.
There's no question that there's people out there that don't like things I've said or done or don't like how I do things or whatever, and that's okay, and they'll take the shots, and there's people that people that do it just because they genuinely have a point and don't like something. I respect that, but there's also, then there's a whole other thing, which is people that are just jealous or that are haters and make stuff up. That's a whole different thing. So
right.
When you're just giving, a true, accurate account of how you felt about something, then I think that it's to be commended, and good, bad, or indifferent. It's just one person's opinion.
I couldn't agree more. Eddie, how does it feel to have gone from a fan to the person that many consider to be the man who kept metal alive in the media and the industry during the hip-hop rock days?
It wasn't like a planned thing by any stretch. 30 years ago, I started doing this stuff because I was a fan and because I wanted to take music that I loved and that I wasn't hearing anywhere on the radio and that I didn't feel was getting a fair shake of support and turn other people onto it. And to this very day, that's still exactly what drives me. That's still what's behind everything I do. I don't look at it as being about me. I don't look at it as being about trying to market me or turn myself into a star or become rich or any of that. I mean, listen, anything that comes along those lines is gravy. But for me, it's always been driven by the fact that I love these bands and I love this music, and I hate the way that it's marginalized and the way that it's looked down upon and it's stereotyped. So it was always about spreading the word, and along the way, because I've stayed so true to it
right.
so long, when it was popular and not popular, and I also, I think a part of it too, I've always liked both worlds. There was a long time where you had to be on one camp. You had to be in the Slayer, Metallica camp, or you were in the Poison, Bon Jovi world.
Right.
I never felt the need to pick sides. I mean, I found that back in those days when there was all that division going on, that most people really liked both sides, but they were afraid they were going to appear uncool if they admitted it.
Yeah, why do you think that is, though? That's strange, though.
Well, it's just trendy. I mean, it's just a trendy thing. And I mean, it's still that way to some degree, but I think people forget how serious that was back in the 80s. I mean,
yeah.
The bands sniped at each other, and the Megadeth camp would make fun of the MTV pop metal bands. And now, it's funny, Scott Ian's a good friend of mine, and I remember back in those days, Scott was real critical of that stuff. And now, Scott will go out on the road and play a Skid Row song with his wife singing, and it's funny how, perspectives change, and you just look at music as being good or bad versus, all the trappings that were around it. So, I mean, it's just a sign of the times, I think, but I just always think the course, and if you look at my book, which came out recently.
Oh, I love that book.
Well, thanks, but I mean, the same thing. I mean, you're going to read about Billy Squier in there, you're going to read about Bon Jovi, you're also going to read about Slayer and Anthrax. So I always like both worlds. I think, I presented them both in my radio show for years. I still do, and I do it the same thing with the TV show. The TV show is actually going to evolve even greater, especially in this next season.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to, certainly always be a rock show. Mm-hmm. We're going to start introducing some I think, slightly newer metal bands, but we're also going to be starting to introduce some rock acts on there, some mainstream classic rock acts. So, don't be surprised going forward if you start seeing, guys like Paul Rodgers from Bad Company or a guy like Neil Schon from Journey start showing up. We know that the show is called That Metal Show, but that's just a name.
Oh, all right.
We want it to be a rock and a metal show, and we always will be, but it's got to evolve. As we're going into 8, 9 seasons, you can't just keep doing the same thing, and it's got to grow and broaden out a little bit. That's the only way the show continues to grow.
Well, it's got to stay fresh, or else people are going to get bored with it.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that there's a huge pool of people out there, and we don't want to be relegated to just one genre. And listen, I'm aware, and this is another thing that we hear from people about, that there are a lot of different styles of metal music out there.
Right.
So that there's stuff out there like death metal and progressive metal and this and that. This is TV. It's VH1 Classic. They are not going to have unknown or non-mainstream bands on. It's as simple as that. It's TV. They want, when somebody turns the channel on, they want people to see people that they know and the most people know and the mainstream knows.
Well, yeah, they want to be able to familiarize themselves with. Now,
and people say to me, well, why don't you have more underground bands on? Well, if underground means that not a lot of people know who they are. Right. And that doesn't work on TV, because that means that when most people turn the TV on, they're not going to stay on the channel. And when they don't stay on the channel, we don't get ratings and we don't continue.
Right.
So it's just, but we all have our stuff. I mean, all three of us on the TV show have tons of bands that we love that were off the radar, that we'd love to sit there and talk to for hours.
Right.
But you can't do it. It's television. It's got to be a balance that reaches a mainstream. Otherwise, it's not going to succeed. And, we've clearly found that balance because, we're 8, 9 seasons in and we're still chugging along. So
you must be,
there's got to be a level of reality to what people are asking for. And the last thing I'll say, Carl, real quick on the guest thing with the TV show, because somebody a lot of questions about, is we haven't had anybody from Iron Maiden on.
Right.
Because they're on tour when they shoot. They want to do the show. We want them to do the show. We ask them every season. It's just scheduling. The same with Motley. The same with a few bands. People will come up to me and be like, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you have Eddie Van Halen on? You think? I mean, do you really think we wouldn't want them on? But these guys have to want to do the show and be available to do the show. They've all been asked. And if they'll come around.
If they have nothing to promote, they're not going to come, especially like Ozzy from England's not going to come on to.
Well, we wish they would, because we don't, we don't, I mean, I know they want to promote stuff, but we don't care if they want to promote enough, because we got 40 years of stories that we want from them.
Right.
That's fine. It's just a question of timing. We do 10 shows or 8 shows in 4 or 5 days. We do 2 shows a day. We're done in a week. If you're on tour when we tape, we can't get you that time around.
Right, it's hard. I know you try to strive for the best. There's no question about it.
Yeah, but these guys, we also can't go get Eddie Van Halen out of his house, grab him by the neck, and throw him in the studio like as well,
Right, yeah. No, I understand.
Come around and feel like doing an interview. But of course we want to have them.
The true fans know the deal. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if it works out, now, like, what I wanted to ask you is, being that you're evolving with the show, you're going to start expanding a little bit. Musically, do you think we are about to see truly the most creative era of our time? Rockin' D, who's in our chat room right now, posed this question. He wants to know, are we about to truly see the most creative era of our time musically, or is it like that ship has passed?
I don't know, man. If I had a crystal ball, You know, I could make $1 million answering that question. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think that a big question that I get a lot is where's the next era of classic bands going to come from? You know, you got Priest on somewhat of a farewell tour. You know, Ozzy said he was done 15 years ago. Kiss said they were done 11 years ago.
Right.
Obviously, some of these guys are still sticking around, but Who said they were gone 5 times? They're still doing something.
Right.
The point is that because these guys are talking about hanging it up, and because they're now in their 60s, that nobody can do this forever. So the question becomes, where do when these great arena bands retire, where's the next wave? Who's going to carry that torch?
Right, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, is it going to be the classic cliche, they don't make them like that anymore? Or hopefully not. I mean,
Well, you got to hope, because a lot of the bands we're talking about came from the 70s. You got to hope that the 80s continue to kind of emerge a little bit, and that those bands continue to grow in stature and history. You know, Motley Crue, Metallica, stuff like that. That those bands can continue to get traction and be what they are, which is a new generation's classic rock. And if they can keep it together and continue to perform at a high level, you'll probably get another good 10 years out of bands like that are about 10 years younger than the ones I just mentioned. But, it's going to start to get a little bit lean, and things just have to turn over. I mean, Def Leppard's out there still doing sheds. So, bands like that, bands from the early 80s and mid-80s, Bon Jovi, bands that were really, really big and still big, they're the ones that will probably continue, with the arena and stadium level rock. But, you hope, and then it's going to turn to the 90s, and then we're going to find out, how many of those bands from the 90s that came through have that kind of staying power. Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. I mean, how many of those guys are still going to, be able to carry that torch? So
it's very Well, you know what I noticed, like we were saying about the bands from the 80s, that I noticed, especially when I go to concerts, and I actually saw you at the White Snake Tesla concert at the Stone Pony, which was an awesome concert. I noticed the crowds are getting younger, and and I know that these people weren't from that era of the 80s, and it's amazing to see that.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, listen, if you grew up in the 80s, you're about my age, or younger. I mean, I'm 47 years old. I mean, if you're somewhere in your 30s, you probably have a kid or two. You probably married. You're bringing your kids to these shows. I mean, I took my daughter to her first ever show this summer. I took her to see Def Leppard and Heart. I mean, she's 7. So, yeah, you're going to start seeing that. It just comes with the demographic and as time changes. I think that's really important, too, because, quite honestly, some of those bands are struggling. I mean, that show in particular that you're talking about was supposed to happen at the Arts Center.
Right.
Got moved to a much smaller venue, and quite honestly, still didn't sell out. So you have to hope that by, as these kids get older, they start attending these shows if these artists are still doing it, because it gets harder and harder for mom and dad to go out there and make all these dates, too.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, it's just... I just hope it perseveres. I don't see it. I mean, a lot of the bands are doing really well, and you just gotta. I mean, like you said, who's going to take up the torch? I just hopefully, But it's funny though. I had another viewer wants to know between the UK, the United States, and Canada, whether out of those 3 countries, who has made the biggest impact on heavy metal and hard rock as far as influences and as far as impact on the actual music itself?
Yeah, over time, I would think you have to say England.
Yeah, because I mean, that's where, if you go by Sabbath, which has started heavy metal.
Yeah, and if you just went even beyond that, just to rock, I mean, from the Beatles to the Stones to, all of that, the Who, I mean, these giant iconic bands are British, Zeppelin. I mean, it just goes on and on. In America, Priest, Sabbath, bands that broke through in America, and then the metal world, Priest and Sabbath and Maiden are all British. I mean, it's I think the one place where America hangs its hat on the history of this music is probably in the thrash metal genre.
Right.
You look at the big 4, and those are all American bands. But I think that segment of rock and metal is definitely represented, I think, most by America. And the blues are from America as well, which started everything. But
right.
as far as rock and general heavy metal, you'd probably have to say the